This conference will now be recorded.
Hey all, good morning. Dilip, Ravi, and Surendra.
Yeah, hi Naveen. Good morning.
Yeah, just give me 5 minutes. We'll start, okay? Yeah, Let us start, okay? So till now we are done with okay, open notepad. Spring Core discussions we are having, right? Spring Core, we learned about IOC, what is containers and how they will work, how to create singleton prototype beans, and how to manage life cycles, how to do dependency injection, various dependency injection types using setter and constructor, how to do arrays, collections, you know, any other class objects also, how to do dependency injection. And this dependency injection also we automated it by using auto wiring and auto wiring using XML approach, and we did using annotation also. And depends on topic we discussed, depends on, and dependency check, and we discussed about, yeah, stereotype annotations, like to create object, how we did this dependency injection automated using XML and annotation. Object creation also we automatic object creation automatic object creation using stereotypes like controller, service, repository. Using these annotations, using this controller annotation and service annotation, repository. Apart from this there are other annotations that we thought we can discuss later, right? At the rate rest controller, at the rate rest controller, and at the rate, there is a annotation name called rest repository also. We'll discuss about it, okay? And we have component, and we have configuration. We have configuration. These all are the most of stereotype annotations. These annotations are for creating objects only, you know, to creating objects. While we are doing implementation of our MVC classes, right, you need to use these particular annotations on top of your classes. You need to use at the rate controller for controller, and service for service classes, and for DO classes we use repository. Same way, while we are implementing microservice based applications or Spring Boot based application, we use REST controller for implementing API, and there is a REST repository also, directly without having these layers, controller services. Directly, if you want to create REST endpoints for your database class itself, for doing your CRUD operations itself, we can use REST repository. And there is a component which is the parent for all these annotations, okay? Component is parent for all these annotations. We generally use component for any utility classes. And if you have any configurations, for configurations we use at the rate configuration class. We will talk more about this configuration today, okay? So as I said, in MVC, right, for our controller classes, for implementing controllers and business classes and DO classes, we use these annotations. We automated dependency injection when we have the classes, right? Like car is my controller and engine is my business. If you consider engine is my business and fuel is a repository. When I have dependency on each other, I can inject them by using auto wiring. I can inject them by using auto wiring so that I need not to do dependency injection manually. So that's what auto wiring is. Just I need to annotate here at the rate auto wire so that whatever object is created in IOC container, that object automatically will be injected here. Basically, we configured these bean classes in our Spring XML file. We configured these bean classes in Spring XML file so that when we load this XML into our IOC container will create all the fuel objects. If I configure beans here, if I configure bean fuel here, right, engine and car, all my controller service repository classes. If I configure here and when I load it, container will create object by reading the path of your fuel class and engine class and car class. When you load it into IOC will create objects. IOC will create objects. And whatever objects created, that objects automatically it will inject here also. Automatic dependency injection also will perform. Whatever objects it create, that objects will be auto-wired. One class object will be auto-wired into another class. So this auto-wiring we achieved using @auto-wired or else using XML approach. Now this bean creation also, if you want to avoid, right? We avoided the property type or constructor type dependency injection by using auto wiring. When you want to avoid this bean tags also here, if you don't want even put any single bean there, you can achieve it by using stereotype annotations. Just on top of your controller class, you need to put @controller, or you can use, there is one more annotation name called rest controller. Use controller or rest controller on top of your controller class so that you need not to configure your controller class here. Okay, so I avoided controller car configuration here. You need not to configure your car class here. Car class means your controller classes, whatever number of controllers you might have. For your controller classes, you need not to do any configuration in Spring XML file. The same way for your business classes, you need to use @service service so that you need not to configure your business class object here. You need not to configure it. Automatically Spring will create object for your business classes also. And if you have repository classes, database classes, okay, CRUD operation classes, you need to use @repository. You need to use @repository so that this repository classes also you need not to configure in Spring XML file. Apart from this, right, apart from this, not only repository, here we can use @rest repository also. We discuss about this rest repository, rest controller during Spring Boot discussion. Okay, we can use repository or rest repository here for your repository classes. Okay, now there are few other annotations also, right? We have @component and @component and @configuration. So if you have any configuration classes, right, I want to create some connection pools. I want to create some connection pools or Hibernate session factory or REST template. All these are configurations. Okay, connection pool I want to create, connection pool for doing CRUD operations, or REST to template, REST to template to talk with another application. One application if it want to talk with another application using REST based communication, right? REST to template we use REST to template. Or if you want to do CRUD operations using Hibernate or JPA, we use Hibernate template kind of stuff. Okay, so Hibernate template. If you have any such configurations, connection pools if you want to create, or any REST template or Hibernate template like this, right? Any configurations that are required for your application, apart from your controller class, your engine class, and your business class and database class, right? Apart from these classes, apart from your MVC classes, if you have any configurations, if you want to create connection pools by using existing, helper classes. Apache given some basic data source, combo pool data source from another provider. There are existing classes that if you want to use here, or if you want to create REST template configuration or any other configuration, all that configurations you can do by using configuration annotation. Configuration we use for doing configuration classes. Okay, for doing configuration things we use configuration with combination of bean. So inside configuration class, right, I want to create a connection pool. So you need to use bean on top of connection pool creation. Configuration with combination of bean we use. Configuration, configuration, configuration we use along with bean. So configuration we use particularly for doing configurations only. If you want to create any configuration objects, we use this. Remaining objects anyway, Spring is creating. For your MVC class, whatever controllers you implement or services you implement or repositories you implement, just we are mentioning these annotations on top of our MVC classes so that this classes objects anyway IOC is creating. Your IOC container is creating. Just in Spring XML file, we are putting the path using component scan, right? Context colon component scan base package name we are giving here. So the package path something com.ds. When we pass this, automatically it will scan your packages. When you load this, right, when you load this into your IOC will do what? It will scan this package. It will scan this package. If this package contains any classes with these annotations, right, if this package contains any of these classes with these annotations, all the classes objects it is going to create. Consider your application is having 1000 use cases. For each use case you have three classes. 1000 into 3, you have around 3000 classes. 3000 classes including 1000 controllers, 1000 services and 1000 repositories. All your classes, all your 3000 classes IOC will create by just reading your annotations, by understanding that okay, he wants to create this class object as a controller or as a service as a repository. IOC will create objects. And what about configurations? For my DAO class, for my repository class, I want to create a connection pool. And for my service class, it want to talk another service which is deployed as a microservice. It want to talk another service. There it need a REST template. And for my DAO class, it needs a Hibernate template for doing CRUD operations. So when you have such configurations, you need to use configuration class. There you need to do all your required configuration beans using bean. Okay. Apart from this, if you have any utility classes, if you have some reusable code for doing validations or anything in your business, you have multiple methods. That methods need some validations, business validations, and I did all that business validations here. Business validations I have using some rules engine, something I implemented. Rules engine validations I implemented. Now I want to use that business rules engine validations. I want to use this rules engine validations, but who will deploy this class? How you will deploy this class? So when you have such utilities, right? When you have such utilities you can configure by using component. Component. And if this business needs any, if this business rules validations, right? I mean, whatever validations you have, if they need any configuration support, again configurations you need to move here. Let's say for this rules engine, if you want to do rules engine declaration or rules engine object creation or rules setup, we do that setup here. Rules engine setup, if you want to do, again that setup also we do under configuration class, again by using bean. Using bean, all the setup configuration setup we do under configuration. And if it is a utility kind of thing, we use component. utility which is reusing across multiple classes. So here this business class using, and apart from this business, many other business classes also using this validation class. So as a utility you implemented, right? When it is a utility, use component. Okay, when it is a utility, you can use component. If it is a controller, go with controller or REST controller. If it is a service or a business, you need to go with service. And if it is a repository, you need to go with repository, or else directly repository itself if you want to expose it as a API. REST repository annotation also we have REST API repository, something that we use. And for here configurations, we use configuration. All the configurations we do by using bean. Okay, and if you have any utilities, so by using component we can create. Finally, who is going to create all these objects? Your controller object, service objects, your DO objects, or your configuration object. Inside configuration, something setup, connection pool setup, or REST implementation setup, or Hibernate template beans, all these beans and all these component validation classes, all these objects are creating by your IOC container only. Just by reading your packages, it will scan all your packages. It will scan, it will read all your packages. When it find your classes with these stereotype annotations, when it find your classes with these stereotype annotations, automatically your objects will be created. By reading your classes, automatically objects will be created. Already we understand like how to create controller, service, and repositories from our previous example. Yeah, auto bean creation. So we consider car as controller. So on top of controller, we mentioned controller annotation. So alternative to this is REST controller. We use that in Spring Boot for implementing REST. So when you mention this controller on top of your car class, it is not mandatory that you need to configure your car class here. Not mandatory, not really required. You should not. We should not configure that class here. Okay. So there is no car class configuration here. Just we mentioned that car class package. Car class is there in beans package. So we are asking container, go and scan this package. Same way, our service class, engine we are considering as service. So we mentioned service here. And fuel, we are considering it as repository. So we mentioned here repository. So none of these three classes configured here. Just we are scanning the package. That's all. So at runtime, right, when you load this XML into your IOC container, when you load it right here, when you load it into your application context, when you pass your XML here, right, what it is doing, it is scanning all your packages. Here you are saying scan the packages. So we are saying component scan. So container will understand, okay, he wants to scan. What you want to scan is base package. Okay, it will go and scan that packages. Scanning means it will read your classes from that package. All the classes it will read. So whatever classes are annotated with this stereotype annotations, right, those classes objects automatically it will be created. So your application context will be created, car object, engine object, fuel object, and your objects injection also will be ready. As you are injecting fuel object into engine, dependency injection also will happen. For the dependency injection, we can use @auto-void. Auto-void is a Spring annotation for doing automatic dependency injection. If you don't want to use, if you want to use J2E annotation, you can go with @inject. But most of the times we use @auto-void only. Don't use this @inject. And here controller class is having service class dependency. That one also we are auto-wiring it. So that container is creating objects and doing auto-wiring also. As a developer, you need not to bother about any configurations here. Just one-time configuration. If you are architect or if you are a lead that you started application, you put the configuration, create your packages and configure your packages here. Whenever you share your application to team and when they start using the packages and when they start creating classes, right, just they need to follow these annotations. Just they need to keep these annotations on top of their classes. That's all. And wherever they want to inject, they should use auto-void. That's it. So those new classes which they are created, those classes also will be loaded into your context and objects will be created. The objects will be created. Now we want to see configuration annotation. I'll create a simple configuration class here, db configuration. I'll name it db configuration, db configuration, db config. So as I said, if it is a configuration class, you need to use @configuration. @configuration you need to use. You need to use @configuration. This is a type of component only. I'll tell you what is the difference between that annotation and this one. So here in this db configuration, I want to create a connection object. Okay, I want to create a connection object. The same connection I want to use across application. Public data source. I'll create connection pool object. Data source is a connection pool reference. So create data source. You can name a method create data source. Any name you can mention here. So this is my configuration. This is one of my configuration. Okay. Inside my configuration class, I want to create a connection pool. So this is one of my configuration method. One class can have any number of configurations. Okay. So just you need to keep @bean annotation on top of it. And you need to create your configuration here. So data source ds equal to new basic data source. Okay. Yeah. Create a basic data source object. Okay. Basic data source dot set driver name, driver class name. So if you want to create connection pool, right, you can create here Oracle dot jdbc dot Oracle driver, ds dot set url jdbc Oracle thin @localhost 1521 exe. Set username, set password, admin, and data source dot set maximum active connections. I need 10 connections, 10 connections from database. We will discuss in detail about what is connection pool. Okay, just for your understanding sake, what is configuration. Okay, so return ds. So I have created a connection pool here. This connection pool is my configuration. So on top of your configuration class, you need to put @configuration, and you can create a method. On top of this method, you can use this bean. So you can get a doubt here that this class is having all the setter methods. Can't we configure this basic data source in XML file? You can configure basic data source here also, you can configure, but we are trying to avoiding all the XML configurations, right? So the same thing, the meaning of this tag, the meaning of this bean is same thing. You can configure here. You can configure the same bean here using bean tag, whatever things we configure here, right? Bean ID, data source, class name, the basic data source we need to pass here, and we need to call all the setter methods. So the same meaning here, you need to call setter methods using property tag, setter method name, set driver class name. We pass driver class name value here. Oracle driver, the remaining URL, username, password. Instead of doing the XML configuration here, right? Remaining my MVC class is configured with stereotype annotations, and this is the connection pool object that I want to configure. So whenever you want to configure such configurations, right, you can do it in XML file. No worries. If you want to do here, you can do here. Otherwise, we need to configure that. We need to configure that in a configuration class. In a configuration class by using @bean. Okay. So completely the XML based configuration, we move to annotation based configuration. So whenever you want to do changes, you need to go to this class and you need to do your changes here. If it is XML based, you can do changes in XML itself. Okay. So when you want to move from XML to Java based configuration, we need to use this combination. @configuration on top of your class and @bean here. Some people, without knowing it right, they will do this configuration here using @bean with the combination of @component. We should not use @component. We should not use @component because configurations will be ready first and configurations will be initialized only once if you put it under configuration. If you use component right here, component is a similar type annotation like controller, service, and repository. Those classes objects will be initialized after configuration only. So if any configuration dependency if you have across your classes, right, that classes will get null object if you use component in place of configuration. Okay, we'll see that in detail. Okay, let me put here some SOP. So this is how you can create configuration also. Now when I run it, right, when I run this, your connection pool object also will be created. Car class engine object, fuel class object created, and your db config also executed. Your db configuration also executed. And in db configuration we have this create data source. So this create data source also created. Basically it will create connection pool, create data source. So the configuration class also executed. Data source also created. Now this data source you can use anywhere. Let's say as we consider fuel as a DAO, right? If you want to inject that data source here, you can inject private basic data source. You can auto wire it. This configuration is ready. If you want to use this configuration wherever you want, you can use this. So while getting fuel name, right, I want to do just right, I will connect with database here. I'll just print the connection, data source dot get connection. System dot out dot println print connection. Finally I'm closing it. I'm not doing any CRUD operations, just printing connections. So whatever configuration you have, that configurations you can inject wherever you want. Okay, now run the application. Ever exception, the network adapter could not establish connection, cannot create pool. Right, so Oracle dot jdbc dot Oracle driver jdbc colon Oracle colon thin colon @localhost 1521 xe system admin. So bean is created, basic data source is available, so that automatically it will inject SQL nested exception. It is unable to establish the connection. I don't know the reason. whatever it is, it need to create actually. There is no issue in the configuration also. And anyway, we added all the dependency libraries also to connect with database. Driver class name is required, right? So even we included that Arkill OJWC 14 also here. So it should be creating somehow network. Already we started, right? Might be connections created, not properly closed.
So I think local host should be there. So it's local
Ah,
lost.
lost. We lost him. Yeah, local host. Great. Good catch. Yeah, now we got the database. So we printed connection, right? Connection is printing here, Oracle driver. So we could able to print the connection. So what I want to conclude here is, if you have any configurations, as we completely moved, right? Dependency injection, we moved to classes only using auto wiring. Object creation also, for object creation also, we are depending on these beans only. And why configuration objects I need to create in XML file? Everything we move to Java based configuration, right? So here also, if you want to do configurations, right? For configurations, they have given at the rate configuration, so that you can create your bean inside configuration annotation classes, so that this will be treated like your XML configuration only. When you want to do XML configurations, and if you want to avoid that, and if you want to bring it to Java based configuration, right? So just create a method and do your configuration, and whatever object type it is finally you want to return. So whatever bean you want to create, that bean type you need to mention here using at the rate bean. Okay, if it is A class A, if it is B class B, if it is C class C, like that you need to create your bean here. Okay, so that finally your configurations will be initialized and it will be registered into IOC container. So these configurations will be injected wherever you have the dependency. So as this basic data source is dependency in field class, it will inject here, so that whenever you made CRUD operations, whenever you call CRUD operation methods using this data source, you can get the connection and you can do your required database operations. Okay, so that is what about configuration. Are you clear, guys? Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So don't confuse whenever you have bean, right? Whenever you see bean annotation, generally existing in existing application also, right? Whenever you see bean annotation, make sure that this class is having configuration. Sometimes people will forget, and instead of configuration they will put component or some other annotation. Don't use other annotations. Okay. It need
Application
to
will
have,
have high priority while creating the object. So
well,
I
sorry, could you please repeat your question?
configuration, a direct configuration will have high priority while creating the object to IOC container.
Yeah, it depends again, right? So first it is creating all these objects wherever it have the dependency injection. Let's say here property based dependency injection it is using. When these
Mhm.
methods will be called, these methods will be called by the user, right? The end user will call from his the UI or wherever it is. Before this method's execution, this injection should be happened. So if this injection is constructor based dependency injection, yes, before creating fuel object itself, this configuration will be executed. But here it is a property based, right? So that it need not to worry. Basically, there is no problem if the initialization happened after your classes also. This classes initialization will happen first, then configuration will be initialized. In case if you want to create this configuration first, what you need to do is you need to inject this configuration here as a constructor based dependency injection. Otherwise there is no much dependency here, right? I don't have dependency, it can create it at any time.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you want to make it prototype, you can make it prototype here. You have one more annotation name called You must ask this question, right? If it is a XML based configuration, there we have the advantage of singleton or prototype. Here, how you can put it? We have annotation name called singleton. If you put @singleton, only one object will be created. By default, singleton is true. By default, singleton is true. If you want to make it from singleton to prototype, if you want to make it singleton to prototype or singleton to false, here we can pass singleton to false. So when you configure singleton to false, it will create it as a prototype. It will be created as prototype. We can see this in boot. In boot, actually, we have singleton prototype annotations also. Singleton true, false. @singleton. Prototype also should be available here. Prototype not there. Okay. Yeah. So there is a singleton and prototype annotations also that you can mention here. If you want to make it singleton, if you want to make it prototype. Okay. So we'll see more in detail about that singleton and prototype again in boot also. Okay. So this is the basically configuration that we should follow. Okay. This is very important thing. Okay. So whenever you want to create your MVC classes, follow these annotations. Controller or REST controller for your controller, for your service, and for your repositories @repository, and there is a REST repository. Yeah, we don't have that. In Spring we don't have. We have all these other annotations, right? In Spring Boot we have REST repository, REST controller. We'll use them in Spring Boot. And once you annotate them, you need to scan that package using @component scan. I mean @context colon component scan. You need to pass your package name so that it will scan at runtime your packages and it will create objects for your classes. Okay. And for configurations, we can use @configuration with @bean combination. Okay, this is very important. And if you have any utility class, something a validation class I have, just a minute. Sorry. Yeah. Now validation class. Let's say there is a validation class. We have validation util, and for this utility class, you need to use @component. Use @component and do all your required utility operations here. You can do required utility operations here. Any methods, helper methods, if you have method A, method B, method C, public void helper. We can use that methods here. Okay, just you need to use @component. Just @component on top of utility classes, so that now onwards that object also will be start creating. Yeah, controller, service, DAO, configuration, and utility also created. If you see here, car object is a controller created. @controller we used. Engine is a service created. And fuel is a DAO. @repository we use. That one also created. DB config is a configuration class. So configuration class initialized first. After configuration class initialization, @bean method also executed. See, a method executed create ds. Create ds is there inside DB config class. db config class created, then inside this class we created a @bean, and that is the configuration. So that configuration object also created. If you see, two objects created for configuration object. Inside configuration, the create ds bean class also created, the data source. Then your validation util created. So basically, how many objects will be created when you use these annotations means all your MVC classes first, all your MVC classes, controller services and repositories, then your validation classes. Apart from this, your configuration class, including all beans. In your configuration class, if you have 10 configurations here, right? All 10 configuration objects also will be initialized at the time of loading all your classes. At the time of loading all your classes, including controllers, services, repositories, and validation utils, which are including component. Along with them, all configuration objects, whichever, whatever number of beans you have here, right? Create DS1, create DS2. Let's say if you have multiple beans, data source 1, data source 2, all these objects will be created. All these objects will be created at the time of loading time itself. This bean 1, bean 2 also. Right? Here we have two beans with the data source, and there is a auto varying confusion here also, right? When you create multiple beans, you know how to handle it. When you have multiple beans, you know how to handle it using @qualifier. In this bean, right, you need to name it. Bean, it have a name parameter. You can name it. First one is data source 1, and the next one is data source 2. When you think it will create a confusion, by mentioning this, right, you can inject which are required qualifier being here. Now if I run, I'll get definitely exception. Bean creation exception, could not auto wire, no unique bean. Data source required 1, but 2 data sources found. Same thing happened in XML based configuration also, right? You know how to avoid that. You need to create your configuration with the bean and name. So here this is DS1 and this is DS2. And to field class while injecting, right, you need to use @qualifier. Here you need to pass qualifier name, DS1 or DS2, so that now it will inject DS1 or DS2. So confusion also resolved. While creating configuration, if you have the same type, if you want to create basic data source only, one is from MySQL and one is from Oracle. If you have two connections, if you want to create two connections, you can use this approach. Okay. And let me see, will this work here or not? Use @simple bean. So in case of simple bean, there is a confusion, right? There is a confusion here. So they given one annotation name called primary. Primary will treat it as the first preference object. Okay, so let's use this, how this works. Will this create confusion or, yeah. It is creating confusion. Okay, so use qualifier only. Use qualifier, name your bean with whatever required name, and wherever the confusion is creating, right, there use this qualifier to resolve the confusion. Okay, this is how completely you can move 100% configurations to Java based configuration. Now we don't have even single class configuration in XML file. Okay, so this is how we can move everything to XML based configurations. Now here onwards, right, this is, here onwards, it's our choice which approach you want to follow. All the examples we can practice it in XML based and annotation based. We have all the available options. You can do XML based, or annotation based. Okay, from tomorrow we will see each example both in XML and annotation based, as we understand both the styles. Okay, are we clear?
Yes, Naveen.
Yeah, so yeah, that's all for today. Tomorrow we will start with the advanced concepts. Here these all are the basic concepts. Okay, basic concepts from IOC: how to create objects, how to do dependency injection, okay, how to handle configurations and all. And we have some design patterns in Spring: proxy patterns, factory patterns. Okay, we will start uh, the discussions from tomorrow. Okay, there is an important one out of all the design patterns, a factory. Yeah, that we will see tomorrow.
Yeah, sir, you are saying something like controller, I mean, annotation controller and rest controller.
Hmm.
Uh, can I understand that controller is both for SOAP and REST requests, and REST controller is only for REST requests, something like that?
Controller is for only within application we will have presentation layer, right? All the presentation and I mean your JSP pages and HTML pages, everything we club along with our code. A single application.
Okay.
There we need to use controller, not for SOAP or not for REST. Controller is not useful for SOAP and REST.
Okay,
Only
there is
like
not no.
single
Yeah,
application
please.
when you have, yeah. We will see very in detailed about in MVC, but as you asked here, let me explain you. So earlier we used to implement our applications, right? Apps by including all the JSP pages and the controllers, everything in a single application, right? In a web context, we used to put our JSP code, HTML, CSS, and our servlets, and all our DAO classes. Everything we used to club in a single application. As a WAR file, we used to do it, and we used to deploy it, right? So in case if you want to do the same in Spring also, if you want to include your UI and presentation code, your backend code, everything into a single piece, and if you want to deploy it into Tomcat, for that scenarios we use that controller. Okay, for those scenarios, if you have UI along with your backend logic, we use controller. Okay. In case if you have UI separately as a separate component, either web UI or mobile UI, and if you want to call from one server to another server, then we use this REST controller. Okay.
Got it.
Yeah. So these are the main important annotations. Okay. Auto wired, controller, REST controller, service, repository, configuration, bean, and component. And you need to finally configure context, component, scan. These are the important annotations, most important. Apart from this, there are few other annotations. In AOP, we have AOP annotations. Okay. And in ORM, we have ORM based annotations. Okay, we'll go one by one without any confusion. Okay, importance of each annotation and way to use, how to use. Yeah, so that's all for today. We'll connect tomorrow. Sharp 8:30.
Naveen, hello, Naveen. Am I
Yeah, yeah,
audible?
go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I have one doubt, Naveen. We usually have application.properties, right? So how we can configure this thing actually using @annotation, or how we
Yeah,
generally put up the.
properties. Yeah, yeah. Properties we inject using @value.
Mhm.
So yeah, that I want to discuss as part of property placeholder. There is annotation, property placeholder annotations, or property location annotations. So there what we do, we configure our properties file. Here we give the path of our properties file, and whatever properties we have, right, wherever you want to inject that properties, from this path, wherever you want to inject that properties. Let's say here you have a name, string name you have, and this property name property you have in this properties file. Okay, just we need to use @value on top of that property, @value. So here we need to give the key, whatever there in the properties file, right? We need to give that key here. Okay,
Okay.
we'll discuss. Okay, actually
Sure.
I parked some topics for Spring Boot. Either we can discuss them here. So there is no much discussion from the Spring Boot there. We need to use, I mean, we need to see how to use built-in containers, and all the topics we can discuss there. Okay, as part of advanced topics, we will discuss it.
Sure,
No
sure.
issue.
Can we discuss about this flyway also? If any application using flyway, right? How we error
Database.
configuration? Yes, yes. Yeah.
Sure,
With
sure.
whenever we discuss about the Spring Boot,
DB.
right? So at the time.
Yeah, yeah. In Spring Boot, yes. If you have any particular requirements, right, you can bring it to me.
Yeah.
At least a week ahead, right? I'll prepare myself. If I'm not aware, we will discuss.
Mhm.
But Spring Boot is simple, you know. On a
Yeah.
fingertips, we can do anything. There is a huge help for
Yes,
Spring
yes.
Boot.
Yeah.
Yeah. The basic thing,
And
we need to understand how to use Spring Boot, how to customize it. If we understand them, then yeah, if any new requirement comes in also, it's easy to us to adopt that.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank you,
sure.
Naveen.
Yeah. Any questions, Dilip? Do you have any questions?
Spring JP and security also cover in this course.
Security?
Spring security and Spring JPA.
Both are different, right?
No, it will cover in this course or
Yeah. Of course. I told you, right? I mean, beginning of this session itself, I told the prerequisites is core Java only. So even ORM also we will discuss here. I'll give few examples on basic Hibernate also. While
okay.
discussing before ORM, right? I'll park this Spring concepts aside for 1-2 days. We will discuss pure Hibernate. How to, you know, create Hibernate application, a pure Hibernate configurations and all I'll show you. Then I'll show you how to integrate it, so that even if you don't have ORM knowledge also, it's fine. You could able to catch up.
Okay. And sir, please share the jar files. I didn't get mail.
Yeah, sorry. The last session I thought share it with you, right? I'll share it today. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Spring Boot PDF, right? I'll share. Anyway, after Spring Boot session also I'll share. But yeah, if you want, I'll share it now. No issues.
Naveen, is it possible to cover any Azure deployment, this boot application?
Yeah, last night only I saw a few. I mean, actually I'm using it, but when I want to deploy it from my local, I see
Mhm.
how to do that. CI/CD also. I definitely can help
Oh,
you. That's a simple thing.
yeah, actually, we use a
I show you
Azure.
in AWS also, Azure also.
Mhm.
Both dashboards nowadays they made it very simple. We can directly create the resource, whatever Java or Tomcat resource there. Resource in the sense
Mhm.
environment, and we can
Yes.
directly deploy our file from local jar file, or as a var file, or from Git if you want to integrate. There is a lot of support, and the steps are
Okay.
very simple.
If it
In
is in case of Kubernetes pods cluster, just give me some brief. That will help a
oh
lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
So put your
Thank you.
topics. I mean, you can reply on them. You can reply whatever topics you want on my email. Okay.
Yeah,
So
sure,
I'm
sure.
noting here, so that at the end of the discussions, right? Once we're done with all the boot concepts, everything, microservices discussions, we'll spend 1-2 sessions or whatever number of sessions required. from earlier session, I got a request from one person that micro profiles concept they are using. That's the latest
Mhm.
thing came into the market. So they requested for it. So definitely, if there is any new concept, right? I used Webflex for my application for video streaming. I'll show you Webflex also if you want to implement any video streaming uh, OTT kind of thing, or if you want to post your videos from your repository to streaming, we will see that one also.
We have a number of business rules actually. I wanted to do some POC on rules business rule.
Okay,
If you
rules
have
here.
any
Yeah,
information, yeah. If
I
it,
can help.
yeah,
We
and
have
if
great support from Spring for, I believe. I did used directly rules dependency they give.
oh, okay. You have any link?
Earlier, we
Can you
used to
share?
use business rules using Kai
Mm-hmm.
server.
Mm-hmm.